Hi, my name's Travis Miner, and on behalf of Open Door Education, I'm here to share 5 simple tips for the writing section of the new digital SAT. Tip number 1, identify the differences between the answer choices. The differences between the answer choices will tell you what actually matters. If the answer choices are the same, except they have apostrophes in different places, great. We know that we need to be paying attention to apostrophes in possession. Likewise, if the differences between the answers include commas, dashes, semicolons, or colons in different places, then we need to be paying attention to clauses. Noticing the differences between the answer choices is one of the best ways to determine what's actually important, what do I need to be paying the most attention to. Tip number 2, choose short, simple answers. It is very common for high school students to go a little bit overboard in punctuation, especially in terms of commas. The SAT wants us to choose the answer that is grammatically correct while using the fewest words and the least punctuation. What this means for you on test day is that if you're stuck between 2 answers, they both seem like they could be right based on the rhythm or structure of the text, choose the answer that has fewer words and less punctuation. When you're stuck, that should be your tiebreaker in the reading section. Tip number 3, punctuate with a purpose. So, much like our last tip, where we want to choose short, simple answers, we want to think anytime we're going to use a comma or a semicolon or a colon, we want to know exactly what that piece of punctuation is doing. If you're going to choose an answer that has a comma in it, you should be able to explain, why is this comma here? Is it joining an independent clause to a dependent clause? Is it paired with another comma to separate background information? Is it part of a list of 3 or more items? If you're thinking of including a comma, a dash, a colon, or a semicolon, but you can't explain why you need to use that piece of punctuation or exactly what it's doing, go back to the drawing board and reevaluate that question and make sure that if you're using punctuation, you're doing it with a purpose. Tip number 4, read under your breath. There are going to be questions on the SAT writing section that you are able to answer correctly because they just sound right. And one of the best ways to find these answers is to try reading answer choices under our breath to feel, what is it like to actually say this out loud? Sometimes when we read silently off of a page or off of a computer screen, the parts of our brain that sort of tell us that's the right way to say it or that doesn't sound quite right, it can be tougher to engage them. When we read out loud, even just under our breath, our brain does a better job of recognizing that didn't quite feel natural, or this doesn't feel like the flow of the sentence. So, when in doubt, read under your breath and go with the answer that feels most natural to say. Tip number 5, read the whole passage. So every single question on the digital SAT is going to come with its own short passage. It might be 1 sentence, it might be 3 or 4 sentences long, and it can be tempting to just focus on the underlined portion, or maybe even to just focus on the clause or sentence that includes that underlined portion. That's the thing we have to fix after all. However, sometimes the very last sentence or the last few words of that passage are going to include information that's really important in terms of being able to answer that question correctly. So make sure you read through to the bitter end. Don't catch yourself jumping to conclusions or stopping before that last word. Read the passage in its entirety. And if you're going through the answers and you're not sure, you're feeling stuck, much like in the reading section, you should go back to the passage and read it again all the way from the beginning to the very last word of that passage. I hope these tips are helpful in getting you started on the writing section of the digital SAT. For more tips and additional information about effective preparation, visit us online at www.opendoor.education. Thanks so much.